Hello, you're watching UATV. My name is Tamara Rozouvan. Joining us in the studio today is Michael Bociurkiw. He is a Canadian analyst specializing on Ukraine as well as conflict resolution. He's also the former OSCE spokesperson. Michael, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be with you.
So just to start things off, Ukraine is in the middle of a bit of a geopolitical storm. Recently, U.S. senators have submitted a bill which would seek veto power over Donald Trump, the U.S. president, on lifting sanctions on Russia. Now, do you think their fears are justifiable of U.S. President Donald Trump lifting sanctions on Russia?
Well, I was recently in Ukraine, and certainly I picked up fears there that sanctions could be lifted, or at least gradually lifted. And as you know, there have been some tweaking of sanctions, especially towards the FSB, that have already been lifted. And frankly speaking, the signals out of Washington have been very confusing for everybody. We heard the very strong speech by Nikki Haley, where she unequivocally said that sanctions will stay, that Russian aggression has been committed in eastern Ukraine. And yet on some other parts of the administration, the kind of tone has been very light, if I can use it that way. So there's a lot of confusion, but I think over the next few days, we'll be getting a clearer view of what's going on. Whatever is happening, of course, in the White House and the State Department is not beneficial to many, many people, including Ukraine, because it does send out confusing signals. But of course, the hope is that the sanctions do stay, because it is viewed as a very, very effective weapon or tool, if I can use that word, to keep the rebels at bay and other parties at bay, and to preserve a kind of status quo.
And to preserve a type of ceasefire as well, to keep pressure on Moscow. Recently, we've seen the killing of a Russian-backed militant commander, Avdiyivka, yesterday in the news. It was everywhere, frankly. Avdiyivka was killed in a bomb blast. Now, do you see this potentially affecting the Ukraine, the general peace in the eastern parts of Ukraine?
Well, the way I see things right now is the Ukrainian side is much, much better prepared, much battle ready than they were several months ago. And I get the sense also that the Ukrainian side is not prepared whatsoever to give up any territory. And then, on the other side, the rebels have managed to resupply themselves. They've managed to put up quite a fight. In fact, a senior MFA, Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs official, said the other day on UATV is that since September of 2014, I believe it was, that the rebel side has been able to gain 1,300 square kilometers. That included, of course, Debaltseve. That is a lot of territory. So
can you give us a type of terms, like 13, in terms of how far is that?
Well, that's about double the size of Toronto. That's a lot of territory. And then the other thing we're seeing right now is that the conflict or the fighting is going on not only in that triangle of Avdiyivka, Yatsenovata, Donetsk airport, but it's also spread many, many places along the contact line, including further south towards Mariupol. So that is another big worry. I mean, to think to ourselves that a week ago, there were over 11,000 explosions in one day, that's a lot. That's a huge escalation. So
you're speaking about Avdiyivka, I presume.
Correct.
You're speaking about Avdiyivka. This was the biggest kind of upsurge in fighting in months in eastern Ukraine. The hundreds, thousands of people were left without water, heating, electricity, food. Hot food tents were set up around the city. People were given hot food and a place to warm up. Basically, it was on the brink of a huge humanitarian catastrophe. Now, do you think? What can you tell us about the reports that you've been reading from the OSCE and other organizations about what had happened there, and if you've been watching closely, what keeps on going on there? What is the latest? What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, UNICEF and Save the Children have really raised the alarm on the situation around, especially Avdiyivka, fearing a humanitarian and even an ecological catastrophe. The problem here is that with electricity, power, and water that were out for many days, and with temperatures dipping down to almost -20, temperatures reached a very dangerous level in many homes. And the water situation was also very bad, affecting possibly 400,000 people. And then in terms of children, thousands of children are still out of school and have had a huge disruption to their routine. Some have been displaced. So this has had a very, very significant knock-on effect to the civilian population. But of course, the good news there is that the Ukrainian side was much better prepared, and also humanitarian agencies were there to help avert any deaths or huge cases of injury or displacement among the people.
And of course, we've seen the OSCE special monitoring mission there, and you're the former spokesperson for that organization. Now, they're under a lot of pressure now to record any sort of violation, especially in that area.
Well, yeah, as I pointed out earlier, with the fighting kind of spread out to many different areas, if you look at on a given day, any of the OSCE reports, daily reports, they're very long because of the spreading of the fighting. And also the mission, as well as others, have been, recording the impact on the civilian population. It's very easy in these times where the numbers of explosions and so on mask the humanitarian impact. But look, this is a conflict that has been going on for over 3 years now. It's displaced about 3 million people. It's caused the deaths almost now of 10,000, countless injuries. So it does place the conflict in a kind of global priority where Ukraine is now on the list of top 10 countries in the world that has the highest number of displaced population. 3 years ago, it didn't have any displaced people. So it's very, very important now that the world take notice that, some solution be reached in terms of bringing peace, because people are really, really suffering right now in this conflict.
I see. Now, the OSCE has also been talking about potentially sending a policing mission into parts of eastern Ukraine. From your experience, do you think this is a good idea, and do you think that this will be successful and will bear positive results?
I can't really speculate on that, but I can tell you that the mission has been doing a great job in terms of, one, reporting, and secondly, about facilitating access for repair crews to restore that water and power. But it stretched very thin because, it does have 700 or so monitors right now, 2/3 of them in eastern Ukraine. And they have been in the line of fire because it is an unarmed civilian mission. So I can't really speculate on what an armed mission would do, but I can tell you that their presence has been very vital from day one, and that it's very important that member states continue to support the mission in its mandate to report and facilitate dialogue and access.
Now, what do you think they could do potentially or change to make things better, to make the reports more important and more viable, potentially for Western media, for Ukrainian media, to keep an eye on this conflict in the middle of Europe? Because all the time you hear that the war in eastern Ukraine is Europe's forgotten war.
Well, I'm asked this a lot. I was recently in South Sudan in December, where almost 50,000 people have been killed. And that is a terrible conflict going on for many, many years that has kind of fallen out of the headlines. And I kind of group almost the Ukraine conflict in the same category. So, look, in Ukraine's case, we have the benefit that there's a huge Ukrainian diaspora here in Canada, in the United States. And everyone has been working so hard to, talk about this conflict, to keep it in the headlines, and to keep the resources flowing. And I can say that my government, the government of Canada, has been doing a heck of a lot in terms of investing money for training, for example, training of Ukrainian armed forces, in terms of capacity building, in terms of sending humanitarian aid. So these are really, really crucial parts, moving parts that have, I think, helped avert complete humanitarian disaster. But it's very important on everybody that the world pay attention to this conflict, because the moment it, of course, falls out of the headlines, people forget about it, and then, you know, things can escalate, and then people are surprised, and kind of, you know, there's not enough action taken.
Of course. Now, you've just mentioned the Canadian government, which has provided extensive financial support, as well as others. What are the Canadian government's future plans? What have you heard?
Well, the Canadian government has traditionally spoken out very, very strongly against Russian occupation of Crimea, against the invasion of the Donbass, and it's one of the strongest international partners Ukraine has. So I think under the new Trudeau government, the commitment is still there. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, of course, of Ukrainian origin, has also spoken out very forcefully. So I don't see any weakening of the Canadian position vis-a-vis Ukraine. It will be interesting to see in the next few days. Perhaps there may be a first meeting between Trump and Trudeau, and it's expected that this will come up. Very, very important to point out right now that Canada is a very strong backer of the sanctions, and that if there is any loosening of those sanctions, I think Canada, using its strong voice in the UN and other fora, would be the first one to put its hand up and say, these sanctions have to stay.
And that's ultimately the key message, because this is the main tool that can be used against Moscow as it, you know, funnels manpower and weapons into eastern Ukraine.
Well, yeah, the combination of the sanctions along with falling oil prices have had a real pinch in Russia. The economy there has taken a real hit. And I think also the sanctions have a kind of psychological impact as well, is that it's kind of the main signal of the West's displeasure of what's going on. So it's crucial that these stay, as well as, of course, the enforcement of the Minsk Accords, and, you know, meetings such as the Trilateral Contact Group are very important. So all of that taken together, you know, will have quite a big impact, I think.
Out of all the different peace talks that are out there regarding Ukraine, you've just mentioned the Trilateral Group, and then you have the Minsk meetings, and then you have the Normandy 4 talks. Now, what do you think? Which are the most effective, in your opinion?
It's hard to say which one is more effective than the other, but I can tell you that in my time in Ukraine and in my time working with the OSCE, I've really gained a lot of respect for the diplomats there, because I can see day after day after day, many of these meetings are not, you know, are not known publicly, but a lot of diplomatic effort has been expended to bring about peace in Ukraine, to bring about this agreement, and to hold all sides accountable. But of course, the main thing here is that at the moment we have two sides very, very close together, sometimes only a few hundred meters apart, and with very, very heavy weaponry back in place. So that creates a kind of very combustible environment. So, you know, even though talks are taking place, they continue to do so. When you have this kind of military posture in place, the chances of escalation is very high. So at the end of the day, it's going to take a lot of political will to de-escalate things and to bring peace to eastern Ukraine.
And on that note, we will have to end our interesting discussion. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavors and in promoting Ukraine and supporting Ukraine in Canada.
Thank you, my pleasure.
You're watching UATV.